coming. He's going to dim the lights down so you can all see better. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. So as you mentioned, I've hiked a lot. A lot of miles. I've hiked over 30,000 miles. So the next step for me was to test my knowledge and my ultralight ways in the biggest mountain range in the world. So I headed off to the Himalayas, and the goal was to hike from the easternmost 8,000 meter peak, which is Kanchenjunga, to the westernmost 8,000 meter peak, which is Nanga Parbat. So from the eastern Nepal Sikkim border up to the India-Pakistan border, right there. So these are actual points from the route along the way, actual location. So the route is basically somewhere between 2,100 and 2,500 miles. It's hard to tell exactly because the maps aren't great quality, so we were measuring with string to know how far we could go each day, and also just going off how far we know we can walk each day and how fast we walk. So I hiked Nepal with a friend, and then I continued on through India by myself. Some of the challenges that we knew we were going to hit were resupplies, logistics, getting enough food for our trips and enough calories, and then also we needed technical gear in places in Nepal, but we didn't want to carry it all the time because it was an extra 10 pounds or so. So we wanted to make sure we had it when we needed it, but didn't have it when we didn't want it. And then another big thing with the logistics were there's a really short weather window, especially to cover this type of distance. So, because the monsoons come on from the east to the west, and then they taper off from the west to the east. So there's about, between winter and monsoon season, there's about 3 months in this area. And then the monsoons hit and then they taper off and you have about 3 months again. So we wanted to do it in one hiking season. So the challenge was to fit that distance in before the monsoons came on. That's why we decided to start on the eastern border here of Nepal and Sikkim at Kanchenjunga and go westward. So, and that factored into how many miles a day we had to hike and push hard to keep that going to stay ahead of the monsoons. So it was also a challenge because of the bureaucracy of getting permits in places. It took a lot of time. In Nepal, the government goes on strike, it seems like at least once a month. And they go on strike for a few days. The whole city kind of shuts down here and there. So it took a lot of time just to get our permits. Then here's a little more detailed view you can see. So basically the route, there's a route through Nepal that's been kind of put together. It's kind of more of a choose your own adventure route. There's a high route and a low route by an Australian guy, and he's trying to put together a route through the whole Himalaya range. But he's done Nepal in 2 seasons, so he hasn't done it in 1 season. It took him about 120 days, and he hasn't done India yet. So we followed a version of his high route through Nepal, and then made my own route through India. So this trail is technically known as the Great Himalaya Trail now. This one through Nepal, and there's no map route yet through India. But in time they'll put that together also. So he wants to make this a worldwide popular hiking route that brings economic value to the region. And then hopefully it makes it easier to get permits. He's trying to get an all-inclusive permit for all Nepal, so you can go and just get one permit for the entire country. Kind of like with the Pacific Crest Trail, there's a through hiker permit where if you hike over 500 miles, you can just get that with one permit for the entire trail. So from the start, like I mentioned, the logistics were hard. So we were paring down our gear, trying to save weight. This was our stove, and we got a multi-fuel stove down to 2.5 ounces. And then this is just packing up, or this is how we can do the miles, basically, right here, you know. This is packing up our powdered milk, and you know, so we don't have to carry much each time, so each one would go in kind of a resupply. And then when we got to Kathmandu, we wanted to go around and see how our resupply strategy might be and what we could pick up. And it wasn't looking pretty from the start. So, I mean, we got here and this meat had been sitting out on this table for about 3 or 4 days while we were in Kathmandu, and there were flies all over it. And we think that's a dog. And anyway, so we knew it was going to be a challenge to get the calories that we needed. And then even before we left Kathmandu, my buddy got sick. So we waited an extra day, and then we headed out to the eastern border there. This is us clean-cut hikers before, and you'll see after. So when we headed out to the eastern border, it was really interesting. This is just on the first day, and it's pretty cool. This is like the progression of packs, basically, like old packs. These are what we didn't have porters, but each village gets their supplies carried in to them because there's no roads up the valley. So these are their hiking poles, and then they each use one pole, and then they use a pack like this and a head strap. And then we couldn't figure out why they use a head strap because our nifty new backpacks with waist straps are pretty comfortable, but for hip belts. But it's really interesting just to see that stuff lined up next to each other. And then from the first day, we were getting stared at by everybody. Every time we went to little village, the kids would just stare at us no matter what we were doing. The adults would watch us walk by. But I guess we weren't that interesting enough for this kid. He's a little grumpy, or he's just kind of angry that he's not a Jedi in training like his friend. But, or these guys. We stopped and took a break, and they came over and watched us, and about 10 minutes later, somehow they passed out on these rocks, even though it doesn't look very comfortable. And then we got up to go, and they didn't even wake up. So, but for the first stretch, we had hired a guide because we wanted to get accommodated to the culture and the traditions and how things worked in Nepal. So we hired a guide, and we had a few technical passes to go over, and we thought it would be a good introduction to have somebody along that had done those before we just completely went off on our own, trying to be smart about things. And we hired a guide, and then we headed up over the first pass. This one was over about 17,300 feet. This is on the descent. And the guide was kind of lagging behind all day, and it was snowing, and he was just basically letting us break trail through the foot of fresh snow. So we were like, maybe he's just being smart, you know? And we kind of gave him the benefit of the doubt, and then that night we camped out, and the next day we had another high pass, even higher to go over. It was about 19,000 feet. And he did the same thing, but we knew at that point, already it had been a few days, we knew that the weather started getting socked in around 11 a.m., complete whiteout up high. Starts snowing, so we made sure to wake up early and get going, and tell him that he needed to move, because we wanted to get over these passes before we couldn't see anything. And we got up high, and he was slowing us down the whole way. We were post-holing even deeper this time, and he was just slowing us down. And we got up to the pass, and this is on the way up. And then when we got up to the pass, it was a complete whiteout. And then he was like, "My pack's too heavy. I can't move as fast as you guys." So we were like, "Okay, give us some of your gear." So we ended up carrying his gear for him. And then we were like, "Okay, so where do we go now since we can't see?" And he's like, he didn't speak great English, but he's like, "I've never been here." And he said he'd been here to get hired before we asked the question. So we were like, "Okay, this is a problem." So we navigated. It was kind of tricky, but we got ourselves going in the right direction, and we camped out that night. And then around 3 in the morning, we just heard screaming from his tent, and we were like, "Oh God, what now?" And then and then we were like, "What's going on?" And he's like, "Yeti." Okay, this is trouble. So in the morning, we went back to sleep. Now it's 3 in the morning, we'll deal with it. And in the morning we asked him what's going on. So he said, Yeti unzipped my tent, come in the tent, and start strangling me. And he was standing on my chest and strangling me, and another one was outside watching all night. It wouldn't leave. And we were like, okay, whatever. So we're like, what did Yeti look like? He's like, little black thing about this big, walks on 2 legs. We're like, okay, sure. So we were like, we got to get you out of here for your own safety and our safety. So we hiked him down the valley and sent him back to Kathmandu. And it was good. And as we hike down the valley, the temperature changes, it warms up a lot. You go from snow to warm and humid every time, like around 2,500, 3,000 meters, which is like 9,000, 10,000 feet elevation. It goes from cold mountain weather, snowy, to just warm and humid East Coast, sultry, tropical type weather. So all these flies are out in the evening, and the locals get really creative. Like we have those glue, like citronella candles and glue strips. They just hold a bowl of water up to a light bulb, and the water reflects the light, and all the flies end up just flying into the water and killing themselves. So pretty ingenious. Anyway, so we sent him back and we resupplied. That was part of our resupply strategy, like I mentioned, the logistics. So we left a duffel bag in Kathmandu at a hotel, and then later on I left it in Delhi. And from various points where we could fly out or take a bus, we would go back to Kathmandu and exchange our gear in our duffel bag, maybe get new shoes, drop our technical equipment off, and pick up our M&Ms and stuff like that from home. And then in Kathmandu, there's a little bit better supermarket because the locals in the mountains barely have enough food for themselves. So we don't want to take their food. So we would have more of a selection by doing it in Kathmandu. And then we'd fly back and then start from that same point and keep going. So the flying was interesting. At times we'd wait 3 or 4 days for a flight though, because the planes don't have navigation systems. So if the pilot can't see, they won't fly at all. So, and in the mountains, the clouds build early, like I mentioned. So if the plane doesn't get from Kathmandu and have a chance to leave by 10 in the morning, by 8 in the morning sometimes, then they just cancel the flights. So it's not a very reliable system, but it's interesting. And then, so after we dropped the guide off, we headed back and headed up, and we ended up hiking up by Everest Base Camp. And this is at Everest Base Camp taking a break. It's like a little town in the mountains. And in case climbing Everest isn't dangerous enough, I'm not exactly sure why these climbers would put their toilet tent right here underneath this boulder, but maybe they need that extra adrenaline rush. So we kept going, and we would go over a bunch of high passes in the Everest area. This actually, with the clouds on top, that's Mount Everest. And then if you've heard of the Khumbu Icefall, which is one of the more dangerous parts of climbing Everest, that is right here. So we continued on and went over some high passes in the area. This is on the first high pass, which was over 19,000 feet also. And there's a lot of famous peaks in the area around here, and there's a lot of outdoor products named after these peaks. This one's Ama de Blanc. That's a famous peak that a lot of climbers climb. And then on the next high pass, this one's about 19,800 feet. You get a great view. This is Mount Everest right here. And then on that ridge line, Nuptse and Lhotse, which are also famous peaks. And then this is Cholatse. It's amazing just how big the mountains are and the scale of them. It's really dramatic. And then just like when you're up high like this, these valleys just have these huge glaciers just going down them. So this was on top of the last high peak. This was one of the technical passes, or high passes, sorry. And in certain places you need crampons, ice sacks, ropes, snow pickets, stuff like that. And then after we go over these high passes, we drop down the valley, usually drop down the valley and then go up another valley and go up back over another pass. And below about 3,500 meters, so like 12,000 feet elevation, there would be some villages scattered like every few miles depending on the valley. And the upper ones would bring their herds to about 3,500 or 4,000 meters or so, which is like 13,000 feet elevation. And when the snow is clear, that's where they graze their herds. So there would usually be trails connecting the villages because that's how they got their supplies from a road end. So they would do that. They would go up and, in some places, like in Nepal, if there were easy passes over to China and Tibet, the higher villages would get their supplies from China and Tibet. Instead of hiking 4 or 5 days out down valley, they would just go over. So it was really interesting culturally because at about 2,500 meters, below that there would be a lot of Hindu culture, and then above that it would start transitioning into Buddhist culture. So as you can see here, this is a Hindu god in the middle here with Buddhist prayer flags around it. And this was a holy site, and both religions thought it was a holy site, so they all took pilgrimages there. So it's really interesting seeing that mix and seeing the change over the course of a day when you're hiking through the valley, or each valley. And then this was kind of an interesting spring. Somehow they set this up. It was kind of like the Fountain of Youth, we thought, like Indiana Jones, and if you pick the wrong one, you might get tired. But it was like in one town, up high in one of the Buddhist style towns where they actually got their supplies from Tibet, China. They had some solar panels on the houses, and they actually had a micro hydroelectric project from a creek coming down steeply down the hillside, and they actually, a few of the houses had satellite dishes. We went in one of those houses and they were actually watching WWF wrestling. I think they could have picked something better, but to each their own. And then we were also doing some data collection for a nonprofit called Adventurers and Scientists for Conservation. So we were tracking where we spotted pikas, because they're one of the threatened species from climate change, because their habitat, they live high in the mountains, and in the U.S., for example, our mountains don't go up that high, so they think that they'll run out of space for their habitat. So we were looking at where they were in the Himalayas and how that's changed over time, and then we were also interviewing locals and looking for bar-headed geese, which are some of the highest flying birds in the world. They fly at 30,000 feet elevation and have been seen by jets in the sky, by pilots and stuff. So it's pretty amazing. And then, like I mentioned, the scenery is just really dramatic. The bottom of this valley to the top of these peaks can be over 15,000 vertical feet, sometimes 20,000 feet. When you look at it, you're like, I'll be there in a few hours, or I'll get up that cliff in a few, or that rock face in a few hours. And then you get there and you realize it's like 8,000 vertical feet, and you're like, okay, this is going to take a little longer than expected. And that's all part of the temperature change as you descend or as you go up. It's because it's so dramatic. It just gets colder and colder, or hotter and hotter, and it's challenging for your body to be used to both of those extremes. So, and then with the temperature change, as you drop below 2,000 meters, which is 6,500 feet or so, this plant actually does grow like a weed. Yeah. And then because the mountains are so big and so steep, the rivers just, like, they're raging rivers down the valley, like class 6 rivers. So a lot of time, well, most of the time you can't just cross them on your own. You have to find a suspension bridge, which they set up between the towns. And this is their version of bridge maintenance, basically. It's just pile more stuff on the bridge and think that's safer. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but this was a pretty common sight on some of the lesser used trails and areas. So the heavily used trails where there's a lot of tourists and stuff, the trails are really good. They're generally really well used. Once you get off kind of into the lesser used areas where it's more just locals, that they don't get a lot of the funding to keep up their suspension bridges, that type of thing, from aid from foreign governments or tourist dollars. Things end up getting run down a little bit. So also, like I was talking about, how people bring their supplies up village to village. There's a road will end at the bottom of a valley, and then these guys hike these chickens up for 4 days and drop some off at each of the towns along the way. So they're just carrying these big cages with chickens for 4 days. One of the most amazing things that we saw was this guy carried this metal cabinet for 7 days up the valley just to this one house. So they paid him to go down and get that and bring it back up to their house. And then this lady walked for 3 days just to bring that load of firewood back to her house. So it's amazing. We would see towns above tree line where one person would go with their yaks and hike 7 days and load their yaks up with firewood and then hike back. And that would be about 4 days to a week's worth of firewood. And they would do that like every other week just to get firewood for their house. Kind of a different lifestyle than going to REI and picking up your gear and going home or something like that. So, and then as I was talking about, so after the villages, we would get up high, and a lot of times up high, unless it was a popular tourist trek, once you got above their grazing areas, or we got above their grazing areas, there wouldn't be trails. We would be going cross country over the pass and then down to the last village on the next valley and hitting a trail and then following that trail to another one. So a lot of times the locals don't go out of their one valley. They'll just go up and down that one valley. They don't usually use the high country because there's nothing up there for them. So up high was kind of where the actual wilderness areas were. Once we got above 4,000 meters on both sides, that's when we wouldn't really see anybody. Other than that, it's different style of wilderness than here, where we have these protected areas like national parks. People still live in their national parks. So, and then, like I mentioned, we headed out to Kathmandu to resupply. So before the last stretch in Nepal, we headed out to Kathmandu to resupply. This was at the airport. It's really interesting the false sense of security you get in these second and third world countries, because everybody's waiting in line here to go through the metal detector, but it's not even plugged in. And then we resupplied for the last stretch, which was in Nepal, which was a 10-day stretch. It was probably the hardest stretch of hiking I've ever done. This was my food for the last 10 days. So I was lucky that I had some food left over in my duffel bag. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to get as calorie-rich food. But this stretch was really hard because we had 10 passes all over 5,000 meters, so all over about 17,000 feet. We were over about 3,000 meters almost the entire time, so up in elevation the entire time, and a lot of elevation gain and loss. Every day at least 7,000 feet of elevation gain. Some days over 12,000 feet, and at times we were post-holing up to our chest in rotten snow at 19,000 feet. So it was tough. Need calories. Some of the hardest days on the trip were the days that we came out of town, because we would fly straight from Kathmandu, which is at about 4,000 or 5,000 feet elevation, back up to where we were. So back up to 12,000 feet and then just start hiking up from there. So we did get headaches sometimes and start getting a little altitude sickness. It was usually those first days out of town. This is my buddy sick, a little bit feeling it on the first day out of town as we were heading up to a pass over 19,000 feet and almost 20,000 feet. So it was tough. We always just tried to get up high and then get down as far as we could, and then camp low, so that would help us adjust even more. So we would try to keep that in mind. At times when we were post-holing a lot, we couldn't make it where we wanted, and we ended up camping up at 19,000 feet a couple times, but that wasn't part of the game plan, but it happened. So this is on that last stretch. This is up about 20,000 feet elevation. This is an area called Dopa. This was the most remote area on the hike. Basically, it's in western Nepal. It's just recently open for tourism and trekking. So the permit's really expensive. It's $500 for 7 days. So wherever you want to go in Nepal, you can go pretty much as long as you're willing to pay the price of the permit. Our permits for the entire trip cost about $3,000. So because we were going through all these individual areas, using all these different treks to get from point A to point B, we had to get a permit for each of those places. So it's pricey, or it was pretty pricey. It's different experience. India is a bit different, where if they have a permit set up for a place, they have a couple places where you need permits as a foreigner. If they have a permit set up for a place, they're really hard to get, and you pretty much can't get them, so it's not even worth trying. That's kind of how they just keep people out of there. So it's a different system, but it saves you money. So this stretch through here, it was a little drier because it's kind of behind an 8,000 meter peak, so we switched out to a teepee tarp, a Cuban fiber lightweight teepee tarp from a tent. So like I mentioned, we kind of switched gear for each area to help save weight. And then this is going up over another high pass in the area. It was just beautiful. This is, as you can see, you can't see any trace of humans or towns or anything from miles. And then finally there was one town in this area, and it's a really dry area, so it's really hard for them to farm. As you can see, it's dry. There's no plants on anywhere. But and this is actually one of the highest villages in all of Nepal, and this village was at about 4,500 meters. So that's over 14,000 feet. Yeah. But it was really cool. This kid's about 13 years old, and he's tilling this field, and he was loving it because he would start riding the tiller like skis, and like turn it like skis, and he turned it into a game. It was pretty fun to watch. And we went to walk around the field so that we wouldn't mess up what he's doing. And then this yak was like waiting on the bench to substitute in to get on the front of that. And I'm not exactly sure what he was thinking, that little rock would keep the yak from moving. But we got close, and then the yak started getting a little ornery and snorting and stuff and coming at us, and then realized he could pull the rock, no problem. So we gave him a wide berth there. But then we got out of that town and kept going, and this is one of the next passes. And then after that pass, we dropped over 10,000 vertical feet to an area like this, which is kind of like the Grand Canyon. So it's just, every day it's just changing, the scenery's changing so dramatically. And then right from here, we headed back up to almost 20,000 feet to this ridgeline, only to drop into the same drainage because that valley is so steep, you couldn't traverse anywhere up the valley. So you had to go all the way up to this ridgeline and walk this ridge line, and then that's our high point. It was about 20,000 feet elevation, and we're in shorts. only to drop back to the same drainage down here because it's so steep. And there was only one way to drop back down to where we needed to go, because everything was steep once you got down. There was this little notch to drop in. So we were lucky we could see at the time. And we dropped in and then made our way to the pass at the head of the valley. And it was really cool heading up to this valley because on the way up we started seeing snow leopard tracks. And this is on the way up. We were kind of behind schedule here. We were hoping to get over the pass and down. This was one of those where we were post-holing a lot. But every time we saw these snow leopard tracks and we walked on them, we didn't post-hole. And then it was snowing at the time, so here and there we'd lose them. And then we'd just start post-holing. And then we'd go for a little while and find them, and then we'd stay on top of the snow. So I'm not sure how the snow leopard could tell or if it was just by chance, but it was absolutely amazing. So we finally made it over the pass, and I mean, it saved us hours just in these places. We could actually follow the tracks and not post-hole, because through some of this we were going about 100 yards in an hour or 2 hours, because this was at over 19,000 feet and we were post-holing chest deep. So finally we made it to the 10th pass, the last pass in this section. And then this is on that pass, and then we were really excited. The snow conditions were good. So this is the downhill from this pass. And we descended about 1,500 vertical feet here in about 35 seconds. So if you've heard of face shot skiing, this is face shot hiking. And from that pass, it was 45 miles to the next village down, all downhill. So just straight shot down this valley for 45 miles. We're pretty sure we were going about 30 to 40 miles an hour going down this. We actually burnt holes in the bottom of our So that's on the way down, and then as we were descending, there would be these alcoves in the rocks, which were great places to camp and just kind of stay a little bit hidden. So we got to the last resupply in Nepal, and we had to buy food there. That was one of the few times we actually resupplied up in the mountains, and we were looking forward to hopefully getting some food. Their standard meal is dal bhat, which is rice and lentils and a little bit of greens, basically like a kale or something that's kind of stewed. But we tried to stay away from that as much as possible, because every time you finished it, they would keep adding more. It was like all you can eat, which was a good thing. But by the end of the first plate, you were ready to be done with it, because it was kind of bland for like normal for our compared for our food, and it's still not that calorie rich. So a lot of times when we could, we would go for our standard here, which was 6 fried eggs, and then get 6 more fried eggs a few hours later, and then carry out 6 hard-boiled eggs, and then there was some protein and stuff, which, I mean, the rice and lentils were filling, but just a lot of the same thing over and over. The Nepalis eat that twice a day, and that's all they eat. So, for a lot of them, especially in the mountains. So, that's what we had. This is the food we got from that town in the foothills, and this was 3 days of food, and this is it. These are instant noodles, biscuits. Their biscuits are like 20 cents a package, so that's pretty good value. And cheese balls, and something called beaten rice. We're still not exactly sure what that is, but when we added enough sugar, it tasted pretty good. So that's for the last 3 days, and then after that tough stretch of 10 days through that snow, which does a number on your shoes, I was doing some cobbler work on my shoes, and I resoled my shoes with shoes that I found in the gutter in that town. You would think it would be hard to find other shoes just randomly, but in Nepal, for some reason, it wasn't hard to find shoes at all. There are dead shoes everywhere. Random spots in the wilderness, you find shoes on the ground. And I'm still not exactly sure how these people leave their shoes and then get back to town, but they're shoes, so it worked. And this is just hiking through a rural village in western Nepal. This is pretty standard of what it's like through most of Nepal, that not on the tourist tracks. This is how it is. This is kind of a poor area in Nepal, or one of the poorest areas, and but this is still standard. And these are some of the hardest places to navigate, because you end up with this kind of spider web of these little trails everywhere through the village, and the maps don't show that much detail to figure out where you're going. So you just try to stay at the right elevation and get out the other side, and then figure out where you're going. All the people live in really close proximity with their animals. Their sheep or their water buffalo will live like right on the lower level of their house, and they'll live on the upper level and have room right there. In a village like this will farm communally. They'll terrace a whole hillside near the village, and they'll pretty much generally farm rice or wheat, and then that's what the village will mainly survive off of, along with their animals. So these are all two-way streets. And that's a ladder. So you can see that they've just terraced this whole hillside. That's over 3,000 or 4,000 vertical feet of just terraces. So that's the food for the whole village. And then, as I mentioned, the bridges they were interesting, as you saw. So the last day heading through Nepal, I actually fell through one of the suspension bridges. And as I fell through, I caught myself there. Luckily, because there's a raging Class 6 river underneath, about 40 feet underneath. And as I was falling, the other end of the wood board that I fell through came up and slammed me in the face. And somehow my eyebrow got caught between the lens and the frame of my sunglasses. I'm not exactly sure, but it was kind of like out of There's Something About Mary. And I was like trying to pry it off, and I didn't know how it was stuck or anything. Anyway, finally I was lucky because there's a little village there, because a lot of times, the suspension bridges are there for the villagers. So they came out with a little mirror and I could get my eyebrow out. And I still have a little scar there, but that was kind of an interesting experience. And then walking down the trail, it was weird. Somehow news traveled fast, and as we got down the trail, everyone was kind of laughing at me. So these guys were doing trail maintenance, and they were laughing at me. But this was their version. This is their trail maintenance. There's no power tools or anything. They just get kind of a bunch of townspeople together, and then they push as hard as they can. They push this big boulder off down off the side of the trail, so it drops down towards the river. And it's just how you do it. And then it was really interesting seeing some of these knockoff brands that we don't really see here at REI. So this is one of them. We saw this one a few times. We saw ROTNH. We saw so I don't know. It's pretty funny seeing stuff like this. And then we got to the end of Nepal, and this is at the end, right by the China, Tibet, India border. And there's a big river right on the side there. And this is my buddy at the end. You can see definitely a bit skinnier. Lost some weight, and this is me at the end of Nepal. So we were joking at the time that if you could see our heart through our back beating, that we needed to call the trip, because I don't think I've weighed this much since middle school. But usually I don't lose any weight on these long trips, because every 5 days or 10 days I could get to town and eat whatever I want. Like, all our good, rich food, like Ben & Jerry's and everything. But here it was just hard to get that calorie-dense food. So I definitely lost some weight. But and then this was kind of my shirt at the end of the stretch, took a little beating too. And then we headed back to Kathmandu, because I couldn't actually walk across the border to India as a foreigner. The locals can walk across to get supplies from the other side, but as a foreigner you actually have to go to Kathmandu, then fly to Delhi or a city in India, and then get your visa, go through customs properly that way. And then I had to take a flight to the eastern side of India, and then a bus to where I wanted to start. So, and then I could see the other side of the bridge, right where I was, like 5 days prior. But so this was the plane we got on, and in case there was an emergency, I'm not exactly sure how I would cut through the steel. But I kind of think it should be around this door. But and then I got to India, and it was really interesting. I was running around trying to get my maps organized and try to find some good food, and do all that in as little time as I could. So I would hop on these auto rickshaw things that would drive around Delhi. And a few years they did a great thing in Delhi. Or about 10 years ago, all these run on natural gas, so the air got a lot cleaner in Delhi, which is pretty cool. So the Indian government, well, I'll start with this. So I read the paper when I was in India, and it's kind of just a different world here. In the classified ads, they have grooms wanted with the different caste systems, and in case you just want to get married, you could just call up one of these people. It's a different world. And then I had about 800 more miles to go, so I obviously drank about 800 of these Tropicanas, because they just give you enough energy to walk a mile. I even found Domino's Pizza there in Delhi, and I had a paneer pizza. I don't know, not my taste, it didn't compare to mozzarella cheese, but it was interesting. I try to eat pizza everywhere I go. And the maps were really hard to find. The Indian government makes it a little bit difficult to get good topographic maps. So the maps I found were these maps like this right here. This was kind of the best map I could find. And this blue line, these are the rivers, and the orange line, these were ridge lines. So that's called a topo map with no topo lines. I'm not exactly sure how that's a topo map, but it's hard to navigate off of. And I brought a sat phone into the country just for my own safety. I had a satellite phone the whole time, and they're actually illegal in India, so they weren't very happy about that. They wanted to confiscate that. It's all national security. Things are tight because they don't get along very well with Pakistan right now, because there's been some bombings, and then they don't get along great with China right now. So both of their border neighbors are not in good relationships. So that's all part of the map situation, the satellite phone situation. So when I was driving around Delhi to scout out the resupply options too and get a feel for how it would be, this is kind of the typical system in India. So the fruit was great. There's a lot of good fruit and vegetables. There's a lot of potato chips, which is good high-calorie food. As you can see right here, it's kind of cool. They perforate the tops and the bottoms, and they just hang them from the ceiling. So they'll just like rip off 10 bags of potato chips for you, and you can just carry them around if you want. And then they even have masala flavored potato chips. That wasn't my favorite, but for a change of pace, it was okay. And if I was lucky, I could find a dusty box of cornflakes somewhere in the back of the little stall. So one time though, like I mentioned, I really love pizza. I found this snack, which was the best ever, because I love gummies and I love pizza. So when I found this, I ate 50 slices of this stuff in one sitting. It was so good. See, it's healthy. It has vitamin C. It even like had little like pepperoni circles and like fake vegetables on it. So when I got to India though, things were changing a bit. The pre-monsoon moisture was kicking in. It was a little bit warmer. The mountains come down a little bit. There aren't as many 8,000 meter peaks, and the temperatures were a little warmer. The flowers were out in full force when I got there. This is a pitcher plant, and this bug right here is in trouble because they're carnivorous. So it was pretty cool seeing all these flowers that were out there. These are a few of the flowers. Everywhere I went in the mountains, the flowers were out. So these are just a bunch of different flowers. Less snow, which was a little bit of a change of pace there from Nepal. And then the shepherds were out. They were in their fields. They had brought their herds from the villages, and they were out in the pasture area. So it was that time of year for them. They stay out there all summer and then go back to the villages in the winter. So they bring their sheep and goats up and let them graze all summer, and they live in a little hut all summer. Generally about maybe 5 foot by 5 feet. That's the size of the little hut they live in all summer in the mountain. So this was one of them, hard at work, or not so much, but generally they just kind of hang out during the day and let their herd eat, and then they say that they don't sleep at night because they're watching their herd, but I'm not sure. Maybe they just sleep all the time. So I walked up the valley. This was one of the valleys. Still pretty dramatic and steep, but in places there were actually flat ground, which was definitely a change from Nepal, because there were hardly any flat ground in Nepal. But when I got up this valley kind of far, then I came upon a shepherd. It was about dark, and this was a really cool experience because this guy invited me to camp right near his hut. This was the inside of their hut, and he let me camp there, and he didn't really speak English, but he wanted me to be his guest that night. And he ended up slaughtering one of his sheep and butchering it right there. And then his brother lived in the hut, and he kind of stayed outside because he watched the herd most of the time. But his brother cooked everything, and his brother cooked up fresh mutton curry with fresh roti, which is like naan, because they had a bag of flour. He made that all by hand and then put it in the fire. And I thought I was going to get sick, but it was the best meal I had the entire trip. The mutton was so tender. I kept waiting for that stringy piece that you can't chew, but it never came. So that was great. he had milked the goat too, and we had fresh goat milk with the meal, and that's what they used to make the curry. And it was awesome. And that's the guy there. His name is Mulan. And the next morning I got up, and he went to milk the goat, and he called me over, and then he had me milk the goat while he was there. And milked the goat, and then we made some tea with the milk, and it was awesome. And I didn't get sick. Even better. The rest of the meat that they did, they slaughter it, and then the rest of the meat they hang over the fireplace like this, and they dry it out. And then they'll, over time, they'll just throw it in meals, and they'll cook with it and try to rehydrate it as they cook with it. They'll do the same thing in Nepal, but they do that more with yak meat there. And the yak meat, it gets really stringy when they do it, and it's really hard to chew. It takes about 10 minutes or more to chew a piece of the yak meat. So you kind of end up just like spitting it out if you can. But this stuff was good, especially because it was fresh. And then I asked him what this was hanging in their house or in the little hut, and that's a sheepskin. And he said that that they use that to make ghee. So they'll take the sheepskin, put the goat milk in, and then sit there for 4 or 6 hours one day, and they'll do this every couple of weeks, and they'll just roll it back and forth for 4 or 6 hours. They'll sit out there and roll it until it turns into butter, and that's what they do. And it's a little different than going to the supermarket. So I didn't leave there empty-handed though. I left there and I had fleas for the next couple of weeks. So I was itching a lot. But their bridges in India are different also. They get creative too. They pile some rocks when they're breaking. But they also had a cable car in one place. So that was kind of an interesting thing where it was strange because they can't get their herds across using the cable car, but it worked. It was difficult for me being by myself to do it because at this point in India I was hiking by myself. So you would pull this cable back onto the edge of this rock and then try to hold the cart back before it wanted to swing back into the middle as you were trying to climb in. So this was kind of a death-defying experience. And considering there was actually a broken cable car like right here, you're not sure if that one's actually functional either. And then another bridge style, which was pretty cool, was this one. I like this one. this was pretty ingenious because these rivers rage and they flood every time it rains when the monsoons come because they're all glacial rivers coming from